I'm Lucy.
And I'm Jennifer.
You're listening to Everything I Know About.
Each week, we share everything we know about a new topic, equipped with some internet research and a little too much exposure to pop culture.
Today, our episode is on male-coded media, which actually, as I was editing our last episode that just went up today about your panic attack, I realized that at the end, we actually start musing on it when we're talking about how a lot more women have panic attacks than men, and how, although we don't really quite understand it, it seems to be that the way that men are socialized maybe protects them from panic attacks. Obviously, we all know men and women are socialized differently. We'll get into some of that, but I don't think that's the main point for today, since I feel like we all understand that. However, I did want to specifically focus on male-coded media personalities. A lot of them have podcasts about tamping down your feelings, putting on a brave face, and like being strong. And actually, my husband Avery, a lot of his friends are guys. He has this group chat with all of his college friends, and they will like regularly send each other clips from like David Goggins and Jocko Willink. Like, oh, okay, I was working out and listening to this specific clip. So like I highly recommend this specific clip to get you motivated. And some of it, you know, I think is satire, but also I'm like, I don't know, maybe it's not. That way of communicating to me feels so foreign. Like I could never imagine telling my girlfriends, oh yeah, listen to this clip from Jocko where he literally says, when anything bad happens to you, you should just say good, because
You're joking.
there's always something good in it. Like if someone dies, just say good, because you got to spend time with them and it makes you reflect on the impact they had on your life. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Don't dwell on your feelings. Just focus on the solution. Turn that negative into a positive. Yeah.
Did you listen to his podcast?
Yeah. I mean, I did listen. Okay. So for our listeners, what we did is we each took two hypermasculine male-coded media personalities, and we each took two female-targeted personalities. So the two I took were Andrew Huberman and Jocko Willink, both of which I had never listened to before. So I did do like, not as in depth as like an actual listener of theirs would be, but I tried to like sample different episodes from their various podcasts. And then Jennifer, you did David Goggins and Joe Rogan.
Yes.
But you were already listening to them, right?
Yeah, in the past, like not anytime recently, but yes,
Okay.
in the past I was. We're also going to chat about female-coded personalities and compare and contrast them a little bit. But I think the social background for all of this is also really interesting, like the lack of male role models, perhaps, or like how masculinity has been deemed toxic so often that men kind of feel left out of the discourse and the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives way to a lot of these, you know, hyper masculine people like Andrew Huberman and Joe Rogan. So yeah, I have been exposed to this media before, but Lucy, it sounds like you're a little bit more new to it. So I feel like you're going to have fresher eyes than perhaps I will.
Yeah, I mean, I would not have listened to these guys if not for this experiment that we're running right now. I would say I did not enjoy my experiences listening to them, and I probably would have stopped a lot earlier had it not been necessary for us to have this conversation. But was that your take? Or like after revisiting these guys, are you like, oh, like maybe I will listen to them more now?
I mean, I feel like a traitor to my fellow ladies, but yeah, I do enjoy it. To be totally honest, I really do. I feel like there's a time and a place to feel supported and compassion and empathy. And then sometimes I just want somebody to tell me to get over it. Let's go. Let's get moving. And I kind of like enjoy that energy.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone. Actually, like Andrew Huberman's audience, 36% of his followers are female. So, I mean, it's obviously a minority, but it's not like there's no women listening to him.
Yeah.
And then Joe Rogan, I mean, yeah, again, mostly male, but 19% female. So,
wow.
David Goggins and Jocko, I think they're like even more hypermasculine than like Huberman
totally.
or Rogan. Yeah, they're like the ex-Navy SEALs. But even on Reddit, I was seeing women being like, I'm a big fan of them. None of my girlfriends get it. I think female percentage of their audience are much lower. Like I was seeing one number, 15% of David Goggins' audience is women. But honestly, even that, I was surprised that it was that high. I would have thought it would be like almost entirely men, because I think on the flip side, when it comes to like female-coded media personalities, the percentages are way higher where it's like all women.
Yeah.
And like no men
that's so
listen to
true.
them. Yeah.
I mean, even our podcast audience breakdown, yes, we're two women speaking, but we don't exclusively talk about female coded things. Like we talk about pretty like universal topics. And our listener base goes anywhere from 90 to 96% female on any given week.
Yeah. And actually, I'll get into this a bit later, but the same is true of fiction books, actually. A study by Nielsen Book Research found that of the 10 best-selling male authors, readership was roughly evenly divided by gender, with 55% male readers and 45% female readers. In contrast, only 19% of the 10 best-selling female authors' readers were male, compared to 81% female.
Wow.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So I'm excited to get into this conversation. I guess let's just start on the male side of things. What were your observations, or did you have any insights after listening to these guys? And like, what specifically do you think makes them appeal to men?
First of all, the energy that you get with these guys, like we said, is very much kind of get over your problems, like don't dwell on them too much and be action oriented. And interestingly enough, a lot of this is rooted in Stoicism, which I feel like appeals to men very much. That look at the good in everything, even if somebody dies, just say, good, I knew them. That's actually directly from Stoicism.
Oh, wow.
And so this is a very
Look at you pulling out your philosophy hat.
I recently read a book on Stoicism because I was dabbling. Like, I'm looking for a life philosophy. So I was like, okay, let's dabble in Stoicism, see how this works. And a lot of these guys espouse Stoic philosophies pretty overtly, too. So they're all friends with each other, too, which I think is really interesting. This is not the manosphere. The manosphere is more like the Andrew Tate side of things, a little bit more misogynistic. Like this side of male media is not very misogynistic. I mean, like maybe you'll get a quip here or there, but like in general, it's more just like male coded. And they do kind of have this network with each other. And one of the guys is Ryan Holiday, who is the founder of Daily Stoic. He has a book out. He has a podcast. It's very popular. And he's a regular guest on a lot of these podcasts with like Tim Ferriss and Joe Rogan, etc. And so I feel like it is community building for men in a way that having the more like compassionate take and discourse driven and like kind of silly banter is community building for women. And I mean, there's so much to dive into here, but it is sort of like teaching masculinity through like Stoicism and having role models.
I don't know that much about Stoicism. Were the Stoics mostly men who actually followed that philosophy back in the day?
This was ancient Greece, ancient Rome.
So I guess women weren't even allowed to be educated at that point. So it was the men. Okay.
It was all the men. Yeah, absolutely.
What was interesting for me is like we always hear how men and women are socialized so differently even from children, right? And like the color coded, the gender-based toys being introduced when you're like really young. And I think it feels like at least that there's been a lot more awareness about that. And you would think that with awareness, we would be able to like correct some of those things. And so what was surprising to me is like, okay, you've got this whole generation of men who were socialized in a particular way in their youth where maybe there was a bit less recognition that, hey, you can express your emotions. It's okay to cry, like things like that. They were socialized from a young age to be really masculine. But then as adults, rather than maybe seek out resources or like things that make their lives feel more open, they are so attracted to these role models or these personalities that continue to espouse those same things. And I guess specifically here, I mean, I haven't listened to Joe Rogan, but at least for like Jocko and David Goggins, that's very much their attitude. Also because they were ex-Navy SEALs. So it's also rooted in military control and restraint, which is like even more of an extreme. So it's interesting that that still holds such attraction, even as an adult, when you could look back and say like, oh, wow, like now as an adult, I understand how I was socialized to be my gender and like gender is a construct.
I'm curious, when you were listening to this, did you find it to be problematic at all? Because that is a huge piece of the conversation. I think when women enter men's spaces like this and talk about it, it's almost always in the context of being like, this is toxic, this is somehow problematic. It even gets labeled as misogynistic often. So as somebody who's like kind of dipping your toe in the water, what is your take from that lens?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think intentionally we avoided picking people who I would have a problem with inherently, like Andrew Tate or like people who are hyper masculine, but also like hyper conservative. And I've even seen, even though I don't follow them, like I've seen on media that they're saying these inflammatory, sexist, racist things. For these 4 hosts that we selected, I didn't have actually much of a bias. I listened to probably like 2 or 3 full episodes or like parts of episodes for each of the guys I didn't listen to a particular episode where there was anything so egregious being said. I did think that sometimes it would come out in these very subtle ways. I'll give you an example. So I listened to this episode from Jocko, and it was just the Q&A section at the end, but a listener had written in, a male listener. He was like, oh, I love you so much. I've been following you for the last year. You're a role model. It's really like improved and shaped my life. And his question was about his significant other. And it was phrased as, hey, I'm really trying to better myself. I'm lifting, I'm going to the gym, I'm like practicing jujitsu. And my girlfriend just likes relaxing. She just sits on the couch all day and she's just in bed in the morning when I want to get up and be productive. And God, I don't want to have to break up with her. I would like to convert her to our way of living. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm learning so much just by the way that this follower of yours, even if that's maybe not what you're explicitly saying, this person has been listening to your podcast for over a year. These are the beliefs that they have, partially influenced by you. Okay, so then his response, right? He started off very PC, basically like, well, first of all, you should pick a partner that's complementary to you. You shouldn't expect them to match you exactly. It's all about compromise. If you expect to have influence over her, then you need to let her influence you. You need to also watch Netflix with her, do the things that she enjoys. So I was like, oh, wow.
Okay.
Very enlightened take. Did not expect this. So he says all that. Then he goes and says, his tone of voice literally changed. It was like, okay, now I've said what I'm supposed to say. And then it was literally like, okay, but dude, it doesn't sound like she's the one. Because even the way you're wording that question, you have to. It just doesn't sound like you're that into her. The fact that you're even questioning this, like, should you even be together? So, and I was like,
my God.
Okay. Again, there's nothing overtly. Obviously, if he'd been like, no, the only way to be is to be in the gym and what she's doing sucks. Here are 3 ways to convert her. That would be like overtly my way. The hypermasculine way is the best way. I don't think he was saying that, but it was, I definitely got subtle vibes that that woman is lesser than you.
Okay, first of all, that's hilarious. I love the code switching when he's like, okay, but let's actually talk now. Like, that's so funny. But I think the problem with a lot of these is not to be like the most condescending person on the planet, but we give people too much credit for being able to critically think when listening to these types of media. People that are smart, well-rounded, like your husband or you or me, when we're listening to this, we're like, okay, I can like incorporate some of this, just get it done, kind of like the hard-ass motivational stuff into my life as a piece of it and as a tool. But then some people literally make it their whole personality. They're like, Joe Rogan does jujitsu, so I do jujitsu.
Right.
And like, I have to be into MMA now, and I am a stoic now. I dated somebody like this who made the manosphere his literal personality. I'm not kidding you. Like, boxing every day, doing the jujitsu stuff, waking up early, not drinking, like the whole thing. And it was horrific. Because he didn't have the critical thinking skills to understand that when you say, just be glad that the person was alive and you knew them, don't be sad that they died, that doesn't mean I'm going to abandon everyone in my life and be a total fucking asshole because now I'm just going to be selfish and only care about myself. Like, there's not a lot of critical thinking going on sometimes, and it lends itself to this very toxic form of masculinity, unfortunately. But then, I don't know, it feels a little bit piecemeal. Like Jocko, he is saying, maybe soften up a little bit. But also, if you're like having all these negative thoughts about a woman, like maybe she isn't the one. Like, I kind of get where he's coming from. But then I feel like somebody's going to take that, ignore the entire first part of it and be like, she has to already be perfect for it to work out. I think that's what the message is getting to be taken away.
Totally. I mean, dude, if you've got people putting out, like, I was shocked by the length of some of these podcast episodes.
They're 2 hours long.
Yeah. I'm like, this is insane. Who is focusing on this like show for 2.5 hours? Like, really,
it's
what they're
modern
going to take
talk
away,
radio.
It's insane. Like, what they're going to take away from it is these headline moments, even if there was nuance before and after the headline moment. To your point, maybe they're not thinking, or maybe it's just hard for anyone to like really fully appreciate the nuance when like it's these sound bites that get pulled. For Huberman, actually, it was mostly dry and boring, which is why I didn't like it. I mean, I didn't think there was anything problematic or toxic in what he was talking about. I feel like his take is he like puts his Stanford professor hat on and is like, let me educate you, but it's not always clear that the things he's saying are really actually backed up by science, yet because of his status as a professor, people just assume that he is telling them what the scientifically backed recommendation is. I feel like his thing is about optimize your life. How do you make sure you're like consuming healthy food and like taking care of your neurons, just becoming a more idealized, more efficient kind of human. I don't think that necessarily skews anti-woman at all.
The one thing I did notice with Andrew Huberman, though, like he occasionally does say like some pretty like anti-women shit sometimes. they'll be talking about like a mitochondria and how it's like elusive. And he'd be like, oh, kind of like a woman on your first date. I'm like, dude, where is this joke coming from?
Yeah,
then,
why
like,
did you need to say that? Yeah.
like we're talking about a cell. So he does say some of that stuff, but like his podcast is so dry. It is literally
yes,
talking about science. Like he's not talking about anything else.
Obviously, there was just that huge expose article on Andrew Huberman in New York Magazine.
Yes.
And I read the article and I was like, dang, this is juicy. Huberman was having relationships with like 6 different women at once, and none of them knew about the other, and they were having unprotected sex because they thought they were his only partner.
I know the contents of the article, but I didn't actually read it myself. But my take is kind of like separate the art from the artist. Andrew Huberman's personal life, how much does it really affect his ability to speak on scientific topics?
Okay, interesting take. I hear you. I hear where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Maybe you could say that it is true of like a professor's book if he was only a professor, or like even like, I don't know, a best-selling author. However, I think the stakes are slightly different when it's building an empire off of who they are and like their personality. With the rise of social media and celebrity culture, the development of parasocial relationships to such an intense extent that we have today, people think of him as a role model beyond just like the content that he produces for his show. They look at his life and are like, wow, that's an example of like an ideal man. And like, how can I be more like him? And so, I mean, if you think about it, I feel like this is thrown at women Disney stars all the time, where they're like, why aren't you a better role model? And it's like,
Yes.
well, okay, they didn't sign up to be that. They're just an actress. But I think, again, I'm not saying this is fair or not. Like, I'm sure they don't want to be a role model, but they are in that position. And I think the same is true of this guy. He's not just some anonymous person recording a podcast in the dark. People know he's a Stanford professor. He talks about his work on the podcast. And though he says this is not affiliated with Stanford, he is leaving people with the impression that he like runs a lab. But the article claims that he's not even running a lab and that lab pretty much shut down during COVID. And so that is a thing that he is saying on the podcast to give himself more credibility, and yet it might not really be truth. In this world we live in today, where there's like an abundance of fake news and you just don't know who to trust, I feel like these things do erode our ability to appreciate science and like trust individuals espousing the truth.
And speaking of fake news and trust, that's a criticism that often gets leveled at Rogan. I mean, I haven't actually listened to his content, so I'm not too familiar, but I think the issue people have with him is that he doesn't use his platform and reach responsibly, given he does let misinformation air on his platform. What is his content even about, by the way? Like, obviously, he's the best performing podcaster.
That's the only reason I started listening, was because I started listening to podcasts a long time ago, like 2013, 2014, and he was like one of the only ones. And so, yeah, it's pretty all over the place, honestly. He just brings guests on about topics that he's either interested in. But now I think because it's so huge, it's gotten way more produced. Like, it used to just be like, I'm interested in alternate history, so I'm going to have Graham Hancock on. Or he's really into MMA, so there's all of these MMA episodes and like lots of military hunting, some health stuff. Like, I think Andrew Huberman was a guest a few times on Rogan, and that's how he got really big. But the black with Rogan, of course, that everyone knows is that he has on problematic guests often. So he platforms people that are either canceled or should be canceled. And then that's where he gets his reputation for being this kind of like far right inflammatory guy. He has this transphobic label, like this misogynistic label that oftentimes actually isn't indicative of his personal beliefs, but of the people that he platforms. So, I mean, that's a whole different debate. Like, should you be responsible for the people you platform or not? But in terms of Rogan himself, he is for trans rights. He's for gay rights. He says he's for women's rights. And as far as I know, he hasn't done anything completely misogynistic. But it's like very complicated with the people that he does platform.
So I guess when he has those people on the show, and let's say the beliefs of his guests are different than his own, does he debate with them, or does he just keep his own beliefs private and let them speak?
He does debate with them, but he also lets them speak. His whole ethos is we are better through discussion, and he's like very much about free speech and that you defeat bad speech with better speech rather than hiding. And then when he went over on Spotify, a lot of his episodes got taken down. Like,
I didn't know that.
Spotify took down a bunch of episodes of his with more problematic people, like all of his episodes with Alex Jones, where he was talking about like the pig vaccines and all this like crazy shit. And then I think there were some other problematic people that got taken off as well. But I mean, they're wildly entertaining, and he will push back on him, but he'll also like kind of entertain their theories a little bit too. I don't know if it's for entertainment value or what, but definitely does entertain them.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's more like that he's controversial because, you know, he's putting people who like clearly have been banned from all other platforms on his show. But it's not necessarily that he's hyper masculine.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some of that. I mean, for me personally, I enjoy hearing from these kind of people because it's interesting. I think it like broadens my worldview. Even if I don't agree with it, I enjoy listening to it. So that's kind of my take. But yeah, I understand why people like wouldn't want to listen to it though. Like if you're like, this guy is insane and you're more worried about people actually falling for what Alex Jones is saying rather than just being like, I'm going into this knowing it's just pure entertainment for me and I'm just curious rather than I'm trying to get a perspective here.
Yeah. If this is all the media you consume, right? If you're a man who is already socialized in this way and then you discover these podcast hosts and you're like, I like them, and you start listening to this stuff, I feel like it just sucks you into this vortex where those are now the only thoughts you ever have. And it's just constantly reinforcing one another.
But also, this isn't a uniquely male problem. This is anybody who's consuming a very specific form of media 24/7. We see this in the political news cycle, even like women. It's funny. I actually had an article that I read when I was prepping for this episode about femcells. I've never even heard this term before. I didn't know this was a thing. I don't think this is a thing. I think this article was maybe trying to be a little bit clickbaity, but the headline is that there's this female media. Think of it as like the Lana Del Rey, love to hate on men, love the chaotic female trope in literature kind of person. And that you're consuming only media surrounding chaotic women and like very hyper feminine things. And it is a little bit man-hatey. And if you're only consuming that kind of media, like you're in your own type of vortex too. If you're only consuming conservative stuff or only consuming liberal stuff. So like this is just another type of vortex.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I think this is just exacerbated by the fact though that like men read less than women and in particular read less fiction than women. So I knew this like going into this and like this is definitely something I wanted to bring up in this context because yes, it's true. Anybody who gets into this vortex is susceptible to brainwashing. It's very cult-like, right? But I think men are already not reading as much. In particular, books are important to read. It's different than reading articles or short form. Studies show that people who read books not only live longer than people who don't read books, but they also have a longevity advantage compared to those who read newspapers and magazines, even after adjusting for age, education level, wealth, health, etc.
Wow.
And multiple studies have shown that reading fiction books increases empathy and understanding of others more than reading nonfiction. And on both those fronts, men do not participate as much as women. Literally, women make up 80% of the fiction market in Canada, the US, and England. So men just don't see the value in fiction. Some of that is, again, of course, how they're socialized, because usually fathers who are men who don't read, and then their sons don't read because they don't see a role model reading. And then also fathers are more likely to read to their daughters compared to their sons. And, you know, there's a whole bunch of factors why it ends up this way. But I think that's another issue, because how can you understand the inner lives of people who are different from you if you're never reading like someone's feelings or their inner perspective? Men also read fewer books with female protagonists than do women. And there's just fewer books, period, with female protagonists.
Really?
Yeah.
That one surprises me.
No, yeah.
Male leads in fiction sell 10 million more books on average than female leads. And the top 200 best-selling books, 64% have male protagonists. And then in children's books, male characters, human and non-human, because this is children's books, outnumber female characters 2-1, which is crazy. And also, like, this is, I think, part of the issue. It's not just that you listen to Joe Rogan or you listen to David Goggins, right? It's that you only listen to male voices all the time, because already there's only male voices being presented. So unless you're like actively going to seek out female voices and like female corners of the internet, how can you be like a well-rounded individual? Like, how can that guy who wrote in that question to Jocko understand his girlfriend at all? You know, it just creates this insane separation that I would hope that it would decrease over time, right? Like as you become more educated, as you learn critical thinking. And I think there's obviously been more and more polarization in our world. Like we see this in politics. I feel like the same is happening with men and women. This is just like a feeling. Like, I don't have any science backing this up.
No, I've seen articles about this. You're right. That's not just a feeling. That's fact. There's a huge divide generationally between men and women. I think it's Gen Z has the widest gap politically between men and women.
That's fascinating. I would have thought it would be the opposite. Like, I remember in psych class in high school or whatever, learning, of course, kids' toys way back when used to be the woman is the nurse and the boy is the doctor. But like now we know better. Like now we have the Barbie movie. And now we have like all of this awareness. And I would have thought that that would change things for the better. I would have thought that like as the generations progress, we get more liberal. Maybe the genders come closer together because more people understand that gender is a construct. But actually in this survey by the Pew Research Center, they found that millennial men, and they're defining millennial as ages 18 to 36, so it includes Gen Z, are more likely than older men to say that their gender faces pressure to become more masculine. 69% of them said they feel pressure to throw a punch if provoked. That is compared to around 50% for Gen X and boomers and 34% for the oldest generation. And then join in when other men are talking about women in a sexual way, 57% of millennial men compared to around 40% or less for these other generations.
Wow.
And so some of that, obviously, maybe an 18-year-old guy is hanging with the bros and like gaming more. And so maybe he's just in more situations where like being misogynistic towards women is coming up compared to an 80-year-old man. But still, you would think because we're like more aware of it, that would counteract some of this. And actually, it's like the exact opposite.
Yeah, I can't say I'm surprised.
I'm
this
shocked.
Doesn't shock me at all. This does not shock me at all.
I'm shocked. But I think part of why I'm shocked is also because, and maybe this is the difference between us, right? Like I live in female media. I wasn't exposed to this male side of the universe.
Who are some of like the big female voices? Who is the Joe Rogan of the female crowd?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I think most people would say the Joe Rogan of the female crowd is Alex Cooper from Call Her Daddy. And actually, I did not pick Alex Cooper as one of her people. I don't know if you thought of her. The reason I didn't pick her is I have listened to, I guess, more of the early day stuff. Actually, when we were starting this podcast, we were looking around for great women podcasters who we should learn from. And that's how we came across Binchtopia. That's how we came across Call Her Daddy. And I know a lot of women who like Call Her Daddy. I know that majority of her audience, I think she says 90% of her audience is female and they find it very empowering. But when I listened to the first few episodes, I did not like it. I found it to be kind of an absorption of misogynistic views on women, but just now spoken aloud by women. And maybe in some sense, what she's selling is like, well, that's a version of empowerment, is reclaiming things like that. I think for me personally, it just didn't really resonate the way that I'll contrast that with Binchtopia resonated. I appreciate intellectualization of topics that like Binchtopia brings, whereas Call Her Daddy, again, I did not listen to all of her episodes, but at least my feeling was that it was more of like a chatty podcast, which is also just like less of what I personally like to listen to. I like to listen to something where I feel like I'm also learning something. So I don't know, maybe we should have picked Call Her Daddy because obviously she is a huge voice. What's your take? Have you listened to her podcast?
I tried to listen to Call Her Daddy and I know it's so huge. It reminds me a lot of the choice feminism thing where it's like, maybe it's choice feminism to say that it's totally fine if women get lip injections and we shouldn't talk about that. But like maybe the real feminist take is we talk about why women feel like they need to get lip injections. It's like, okay, yeah, feminism to say she can like talk about giving blowjobs all day long, but like, why does she feel like she needs to talk about this and like make it her personality? I think that's the more interesting question. And then when I listened to Binchtopia, I felt like I was like hanging out with the girls that would question why we need to talk about what Alex Cooper is talking about. And I was like, okay, I think I found my crowd a little bit more.
Totally.
And I found a lot of men on Reddit talking about Call Her Daddy. There was this really interesting quote that I found. Thank you, Reddit user blank. Didn't get your name, but back in the OG days, it was like a power dynamic thing. They had very interesting commentary of guys and girl relationships, hacks for finding info on each other, breaking into phones, sex tips for men and women. I think men could actually find it interesting. Now, why the fuck would a guy listen to her having boring-ass girl talk with a random influencer? Not even remotely insightful and probably their worst nightmare, listening to girls talk about their feelings. LOL.
Oh my God.
So if we were wondering why men aren't super keen on listening to our media, I guess we got the really candid feedback why.
Oh my God. Yeah. But that's because that Reddit user had never read a fiction book with a female protagonist, so never learned to develop empathy on how women see the world.
Oh my God, so real.
When it comes to female-coded media personalities, even within the voices we chose, there's some nuance. I feel like Binchtopia, Call Her Daddy, they're, to me, in a slightly different category than I guess maybe some of the other really popular female podcasters out there. Like I'm thinking Esther Perel or Brene Brown or Glennon Doyle. Or one of the ladies I chose was Julia Louis-Dreyfus. She has a new podcast out called Wiser Than Me. Have you heard of this?
Oh, I haven't. No.
It's actually number 2 right now on the top charts on podcasts.
Wow.
Insane.
Right after Joe Rogan, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, actually, Joe Rogan's like number 4 right now.
Oh, wow.
I think This American Life right now is number 1. But so it's season 2. And the concept of the show is that when Julia turned 60, she really felt like she wanted to seek wisdom from older women. Obviously, there's so little presence, media, voice from older women because we don't appreciate older women in our society. Her first season is inviting all of these really iconic women for an interview. And the episode I listened to is the first one in season 2 where she has Sally Field. Do you know who Sally Field is?
Why do I know the name, but I can't place her?
Oh, she's iconic. The first movie I saw of hers was Norma Ray. I watched it in social studies class in middle school. Norma Ray was an iconic union organization movie. She was in Forrest Gump. She was in Mrs. Doubtfire. She's in a lot of these iconic movies, but she's 77 now. And I literally was so moved because only now in this late chapter of their lives, these powerful women who worked so hard and struggled and fought, they say they are finally themselves.
That's so tender, though. I don't think I could listen to it because I would cry. It would make me feel so tender.
That's the difference between Brene Brown. I haven't really listened to much of her stuff. I'm familiar with her work broadly, but I would be curious to get your take. And then the other one I listened to is Glennon Doyle, which I feel like her story is really similar. It's a story of empowerment and sharing these things that are uncomfortable and being ultra vulnerable. I feel like that to me is really female coded. I don't know if you agree. It's slightly different than the Binchtopia or the Call Her Daddy. It's just this embrace your imperfectness that I feel like is almost the opposite of this hyper-masculine, optimize your life, become the most ideal version of you. These women are just nope, just accept yourself for who you are. Don't try to change.
Totally. I mean, to be fair, the Binchtopia Call Her Daddy hosts, they're just people. They're just cultural commentators. They're just girls. And then Brene Brown is a professor, researcher. Yeah. She's a PhD. These are professional ass people. But you're right. It does feel like when I listen to Brene Brown or read one of her books, it's being in a therapy session almost. Mm-hmm. I feel like I've learned therapy skills from Brene Brown. She had this whole thing where it was how to communicate with your partner, even a business partner, where you're having a fear or a thought that isn't founded in reality, but you want to ask if it is because you have anxiety about it. You frame it as, well, I wanted to talk to you about something. I'm having a thought and it's making me anxious and this is my thought. You explain it like that and then they can confirm or deny and then you open it up instead of acting out of this fear. And that actually fundamentally changed how I communicate. But I got it from Brene Brown on a podcast. That is insane.
Nice. Free therapy.
It is confronting in a lot of ways, but it's about finding strength and power in your more feminine qualities like vulnerability. I mean, literally Daring Greatly is about how vulnerability makes you a good leader, makes you courageous and strong.
Yeah, we've got lots of different flavors of people. You've got the Joe Rogans where it's just a person. Joe Rogan doesn't have any qualifications, right? I don't think so. Isn't he just a guy?
No, but his guests do.
Okay.
His guests do.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes.
Okay. They either do or they really don't.
Sometimes. Yeah.
But you've got Andrew Huberman who, he has qualifications. It's interesting, though, to see someone like Andrew Huberman, which I know he's not a therapist, he's on the neuroscientist path, but he has such a different take and his approach is so different than Brene Brown's, who is similarly educated.
Brene Brown, interestingly enough, I didn't know this about her until I researched her for the pod, but all of her degrees are in social work, actually. I thought she was more in the management or psychology realm of things.
Oh, I didn't know that. Do you, in your normal life, when you're not prepping for a podcast episode, what percentage of the media you consume would you say is more female versus male coded?
This is so sad, but 100% almost. I really only have listened to male coded media very intentionally and very rarely. Literally when I'm I need to kick my ass a little bit right now.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll put on a little Goggins. But
yeah.
I almost exclusively listen to Binchtopia if I'm listening to anything, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. And I think it is interesting because we spent the first half of the episode talking about how it can be really toxic when men only listen to these really hyper-masculine men and maybe they're not thinking critically or it's resulting in some negative consequences. It's interesting to think about that in our own lives where I do only consume female media. And obviously the conservative side of things always says, oh, liberals are triggered so easily and they can't handle discussion. In some senses, I do feel wow, I just opt out of listening to that stuff. And I think I've justified that because I'm well, my identities are in the minority. Why is it my job to put my emotional labor on the line to listen to this crap? But on the other side of things, it is very much we are in our own echo chamber. And I think if a man were to come in and listen to a Binchtopia episode, they might be listening to that being like, oh, this is misogynistic towards men. Whereas like, I think it's like a totally normal thing because it's just me and the girlies talking about how guys suck. And like, I feel like that's fine to say,
Really?
you know?
Yeah, no, I think about this all the time. I am so entertained by that kind of discourse and I enjoy listening to it. Obviously, like I listen to it too, but I'm like, God, I really hope men aren't listening to this because I don't want them to go into interactions with women thinking that that's how we think. But it's like a vent session almost with the girls, you know? And if it could remain contained, that'd be great. But it doesn't, unfortunately.
Yeah, although the reality is I don't think men are listening because they only listen based on the stats, based on our own experience, right?
So it is contained.
Yeah, it is
naturally contained.
Yeah.
Totally.
I mean, I remember, so Glennon Doyle, she has this podcast out now called We Can Do Hard Things, and it shares a lot of the themes with her most recent book that was published in 2020, Untamed. Have you read that book?
I did not.
Okay. So I read that book when it came out, and actually it had like pretty big impact on me because I don't generally read, I guess, self-help books. I mean, it's a memoir. It's not a self-help book, but I guess that's not typically the type of novel I'm reading. And so I saw that it was on the bestseller list. I picked it up and I thought it was so powerful. And I actually had Avery read it because I was like, I feel this way all the time with Avery. And also if I had more influence over other men in my life, I probably would ask them to read it too. Where I'm like, I think this book is helping you understand a new perspective on how I think. I'm asking him to read it as my partner so he can understand me better.
So what is the 3-sentence summary of what the book's about? I don't know that much about it.
Yeah, she was married. She actually started off very Christian. I think her first book was about Christianity in some ways. And she has like 3 kids. And her third book, Untamed, is about her falling in love with a woman, Abby Wambach.
The soccer player?
Yeah, the soccer player who's her wife now. And so it's about...
What?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, you should go read this book.
What?
She meets Abby at like a conference, falls in love with her, and it's like the process of realizing she's queer and like divorcing her husband, coming to terms with what that will do to her family, her kids.
Okay, wow, you just blew my mind. I had no idea. I thought she was just some lady. Like I didn't...
Well, she is. Her story, she is just some lady. Like, she was just a mommy blogger. She had a blog about Christian life and, like, family values, I think, initially. And now she's become this, like, icon for the queer movement. Yeah, and, like, all this
How
stuff.
misogynistic am I, though, for saying she was just some lady? Wow, I need to really examine that. That was not cool. But I didn't know she had such an interesting life. Wow.
Yeah, she has such an interesting life. And it's funny because the blowjob thing, when I think Call Her Daddy, I think...
Blowjob thing.
Like, when I think Call Her Daddy, I think about what you said about the blowjobs, how she's espousing blowjobs. And, like, Glennon Doyle has a chapter in her book called Blowjobs. But it's about how she and her husband at the time, they are visiting a relationship therapist because her husband actually cheated on her. And so they go after he admitted that. And then she, partway through those sessions, starts to explain that she's falling in love with a woman named Abby. So like this is all coming out in therapy. And the therapist denies the legitimacy of that love interest in Abby and instead suggests that she starts giving her husband more blowjobs.
You're kidding. What?
No, I'm not kidding. I mean, yeah, she says that's what happened in her memoir. So literally you got Alex Cooper being like, yeah, I love giving blowjobs. And then in one sense, like Call Her Daddy is a symbol of like female empowerment, I guess. And then in this other, it's clearly a tool of oppression to deny your feelings.
Okay, I think that therapist was like trying to play the reverse Uno, like not trying to give her hand away during therapy.
Yeah.
Being like, this will drive you to Abby. If you give your husband more blowjobs, like you will be in Abby's arms within the month. But I can't say this out loud because we're in therapy.
That's so funny. Hopefully. Or they're just really bad. But yeah.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
But I realized like after I said, oh, I only listened to Binchtopia recently. It's not actually true. Like I listened to My First Million and like some dev podcasts and stuff because Lucy and I are working on a startup right now and I'm developing it, like coding it. And sometimes I get into code problems and there's no women who talk about this shit on podcasts. It's really sad. So like if I ever want like startup advice or problem solving in anything like tech or startup related, it's like mostly male voices, which makes me sad. So involuntarily, I actually do consume a lot of male media because I'm a software engineer. But
yeah,
to counteract that, I just throw on a Binchtopia episode. Do you think you'll be returning to the manosphere anytime soon?
I will say that I'm glad I listened because now I feel like similar to how when I ask Avery to listen to something that I really want him to listen to, I feel like I understand him a bit better. And yeah, I totally see value in like that ex-Navy SEAL uber intense jolt of adrenaline in the right environment, even in my own life. If I'm ever doing something super, super hard and I can't get through it, maybe I'll put them on and they can be my soundtrack. But yeah, I think if anything, my big takeaway from this is like just like the importance of reading. It's like, I obviously love podcasts. We're making a podcast, but I think if you only focus on shorter form media where it's not always clear what is intended to be fiction or just an opinion versus like a fact, things can get blurry really quick. And I really appreciate consuming written forms of content where like I have the time to process and it's just like a much slower, it just takes longer to read a book than listen to a podcast. And I think it forces you to think a little bit more critically. So if anything, I just feel like I have way more ammunition to like be telling all my guy friends, you must read fiction. Don't give me that like I only read business books crap.
I was telling you in the 75 hard challenge that I know a lot of men do and women too, part of the thing that you have to do for 75 days is read 10 pages of a nonfiction book. And this was developed by like, I think it was an ex-Navy SEAL. It might have been Jocko. I think he might be the one who did 75 hard. Anyway, it only counts if it's a nonfiction book, which is just driving home the point that men just do not appreciate fiction at all.
Yeah. Or like pleasure is okay. You know, why are you doing so many hard things? Are you doing 75 hard things? Damn. Okay. All right. Just be yourself. Like embrace what the girlies say. Embrace the vulnerability. Just accept yourself.
Brene Brown would agree.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
If you enjoy the pod, we would love for you to give us a follow and rate us on Apple Podcasts, which helps us get the word out and reach new listeners. Full transcripts and show notes are available on Patreon, where if you choose to become a patron, you'll also get access to bonus content, our monthly book club, and our eternal gratitude.
If you'd like to get in touch or suggest a topic for a future episode, email us at everythingiknowaboutpod@gmail.com or DM us across all socials at EikaPod, that's EIKA pod. Thanks for listening and see you next week.